Well, we can speak now to one of the authors of that report mentioned by Yuka, Professor of Biology at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, Martin Wagner. Thanks for your time. Now, Professor, we were looking there. Plastic, it appears, has seeped into every single part of our world, even into our bodies. Some say it's in our brains, some say we need more research. What's the latest findings you know on that, of where, how, to what extent plastic is everywhere?
Good morning from Geneva, and treaty negotiations are bound to begin today. So, yeah, let's look what this negotiation is bringing. But I would say the science is really clear. There's very good scientific evidence that plastics do have health impacts across its full life cycle. And that sounds a bit weird, but that's a treaty diplomatic lingo. But you know, people in the clip as well. People think about plastic pollution as pollution of the oceans, and that's certainly extremely important. But plastic pollution really begins when we're making plastics, when we're extracting oil and gas from the ground. There's examples of greenhouse gas emissions, but there's also air pollution coming from that affects our health directly. So, for instance, air pollution caused by plastic production costs us $200 billion in health-related economic losses per year. So I really want to emphasize that it's really not only about the waste that's ending up in the oceans and in nature, it's really at every stage that we are producing plastics, we're making it, we're using it, and then it ends up, unfortunately, in nature that plastic pollution is causing health harms. And that should be reflected, I think, in the negotiations. That's what the science is telling us. And I hope the negotiators will listen to the best available science.
But one immediately thinks among the negotiators are oil-producing nations and companies. There's a lot of power among those oil producers. How do you see it moving forward?
Well, I think like what policymakers, decision makers in those countries should kind of reflect upon again is the science. We're seeing that the health impacts of plastic production and the use of plastic particularly affects their countries, right? For instance, the air pollution that I talked about, but also like the chemicals, the harmful chemicals that we use in plastics in particular affect Southeast Asia and the Middle East, and amongst the Middle East countries are some who are trying to spoil the treaty, right? So we're seeing, for instance, that the mortality related to chemicals in plastic is particularly high in Middle East countries. So policymakers just need to reflect, do they listen to the science or do they put short-term profits in the forefront of their thinking?
Short-term profits indeed, because the report does suggest the trillions that it costs in addressing the health concerns. It outlines that, you know, from infancy, you know, the most vulnerable really affected, because it looks like we can't avoid putting plastic into our system at the current stage. It's in our water supplies, it's everywhere.
Right, so exposures to micro nanoplastics, but also chemicals from plastics affect us all on a global scale, right? So these kind of particles, but also chemicals are in the water we drink and the food we eat and in the air we breathe. So it's really difficult to you know, kind of address that kind of toxic problem that we have with plastics, and also I would say that toxic relationship. That's why I think the treaty is so important in making sure to kind of get rid of the most harmful chemicals in plastics, but also, and that's most contentious here in the negotiations, bring plastic production down to a level that's more sustainable. And that's hardly contested, of course, because certain states do depend on producing more oil and gas. They want to put that into production of more plastic. So we're really looking at a wave of plastic coming at us. Plastic production is about to triple in the near future, and there's no way humanity will manage that amount of plastic. So that's why it's important to make sure to push for ambition there. And we do hope as scientists that policymakers would listen to our science, especially taking into account the health effects, and make sure that the treaty delivers what it promises, and plastic pollution, protect human health and protect the environment.
Indeed, it was quite surprising to me, at least, to read that production was going to triple, was going to increase so exponentially, given that in a lot of countries we're trying to reduce it, you know, getting rid of plastic bags, getting rid of some of the single-use plastic. But I understand it is still that single-use plastic that is the main culprit of our build-up of plastic pollution, the drink bottles and the takeaway food trays.
Right. So of course, like the major problem is what we call a linear economy, right? So about 80% of the plastic we're producing every year does become waste in a very short time. And that's mostly single-use plastics. It's packaging as well. 40% of plastics are used for packaging, that we just use to wrap and protect products and we discard after we've kind of purchased them and unwrapped them. So I think like we need to focus on like the linear problem there. We take something, we take oil, we make plastic, we use it for a very short time, and then it becomes waste. And then the public needs to pay for dealing with that waste. And that's really important also to keep in mind, the health costs, but also the waste management costs, the environment costs. That's all costs of plastics that everyone is paying, that taxpayers are paying, and that's not reflected in the price of plastic, right? So that's why plastic is so cheap and it's flooding the market, because the true costs of plastics, including the cost of pollution and the cost to our health, are really not part of the pricing of plastics. And that's hopefully something that will also change with the Plastics Treaty.
Not wanting to sound defeatist, but is it too late to clean up the problem of plastic pollution that we already have in our world?
Yes, so the problem of what we call legacy pollution is, of course, it's like in soils, it's in the air, it's in the seas, it's in rivers and lakes, and it's incredibly difficult to kind of clean up plastics that we do have in the oceans, for instance. And that's what's, because they're so persistent, they're just staying around, sticking around for decades, if not hundreds of years. So it's technically incredibly difficult to, clean up. And you see the images on your screens, clean up the mess that humanity has created, right? That's why I believe it's even more important that we use this opportunity of this treaty to stop, turn off the tap, as they say, to stop like putting more plastics in the environment. It's more than 20 million tons of plastics that end up in nature every year, and we urgently need to turn off that tap.
Professor Martin Wagner is in Geneva as those talks get underway. Thanks very much for your time and joining us here on France 24. Much